pictures that my parents had of me as a child or as a baby because I was born with a heart defect, a VSD for your cardiologist in here if you want to know specifically. And I was very, very sick as a child for the first 11 and a half years of my life. I was in and out of hospitals, specifically with double pneumonia, at least 2 to 3 times a year. And the doctors couldn't figure out why I would always get pneumonia. And they kept saying, it's not related to her heart. It's not related to her heart. We don't know why this keeps happening. But every year, it got worse and worse and worse. Until my 6th grade year, I spent several months out of school. So my mom called a cardiologist that was located in Birmingham, Alabama, which is about an hour and a half from my hometown, and said, I've got to get my daughter up here. I just feel like it's her heart. And they said, no, it's no way. Pneumonia, there's no correlation. It's not her heart. She goes, please let her come. Evaluate her. I'll pay for it out of my pocket if the insurance doesn't approve it. So the lady that was taking the appointments and saw how desperate and heard how desperate my mother's voice was, said, come on up. So she packs me in the car. I'm very sick. I had just been discharged from the hospital. This was in December. I begged to be home for Christmas. And she takes me up there to the hospital. They do the ultrasound. And he turns around and the cardiologist turns around and tells my mom in front of me, oh my gosh, she has 6 months to live. So, of course, my mother was hysterical, right? As any mother would be. But the only thing that went through my head was, but I've just made cheerleading for junior high. What do you mean I have 6 months to live? And what do you mean I have to have surgery and my chest is going to be cracked open? Right? So I go back to school for a little while. They say, go try to finish school. My surgery was scheduled. I go, I have my catheterization. They found another defect on the side of my heart they didn't know about. They said that was worse than the one that they knew about. But the whole time that I was going through the process of the heart catheterization and being checked in, the only thing I would tell everybody was, you got to get me out of here for cheerleading camp in July. That was the only thing I was concerned with. And they would try to tell me what I would feel like when I woke up and what my recovery would be. And I saw my parents all upset, my family, my friends, my church members. But the only thing that mattered to me was to be at cheerleading camp in July. And they would just kind of laugh and say, okay, dear, you'll be there. So I have my surgery. And here it is 26 years later. And I can honestly tell you that I remember what I felt like coming out of that anesthesia. I had a tube going down my throat. I remember grabbing for it. And it felt like the weight of the hospital was on my chest. I felt really bad. And when they moved me out of the ICU to my room, they tried to what? What do you always try to do to your patients? Out of bed, get up and walk. I refused. I was in so much pain. I said, there's no way that I will ever walk again. And as the days went by, I still refused to walk, and I was getting really sick. Because I had been laying, I started to do what? Develop double pneumonia. And I was going down really bad, and they were about to readmit me to the ICU. And then one morning, something astonishing happened. Everyone that worked on that pediatric cardiac floor came rushing into my room with pom-poms. And they started cheering. And they said, Natasha, you've got to get out of bed. You got to make it to cheerleading camp in July. And that bell went off. I was like, you're right. Cheerleading camp in July. And I got out that day. And I walked around the whole hall. I was determined. And the next day, I walked even more. And a week later, I was home. And guess what? In July, I was at cheerleading camp. And I never really thought about that. You know, it wasn't until you're an adult and someone asked me in a forum such as this, what is an engaged workforce? That I thought about that story, just that moment. And I thought about where would I have been today if that workforce wasn't as engaged on that pediatric cardiac floor to get me out of that bed, to know what was special to me, to know what would motivate me to get up. Would I be standing here today? I don't know. And while I can't picture their particular faces, all I know is when I reflect back on having open heart surgery at 11 years old, I don't see that as a time where it was bad or reflect on it that something bad happened to me. I reflect back on the fact that there was a whole floor of hospital employees that saved my life. And you probably have a story like that of a patient that you've impacted that they either think about now or they'll think about in the future. And when I think about the whole floor, it wasn't just the nurses. It was housekeeping, as we called it then. It was the people that came and took the money for the TV and the telephone. Remember back in the day, they would come and collect. I remember all of those people and how they would interact with my mother as she sat there as we were an hour and a half away from home. She's the one around the clock refused to leave. But they would sit down and talk to her because she wouldn't go to sleep. She wouldn't leave. They would run downstairs and get things for her. I remember her on the phone saying, oh my gosh, my deductible is so high, what am I going to do? And they said, ma'am, can you give us $20 a month? And we're seeing the relief on her face, knowing that she could pay for this. We all impact the patient experience. But we can only do that if we are, in fact, engaged. And we're going to talk about how engaged we are based upon the engagement survey that we took just a couple of months ago. So we performed very well on that, and our employees have told us, or HealthStream was able to analyze, that that's high performance. In that other box, though, where we have low performance but high importance, I want you to look at these three, because they're very important. So we looked at those 5 domains or those 8 domains, and we saw pay and benefits, and we saw some things that as a leader, you can't necessarily impact, right? You can't walk into Di Woolley's office and say, hey, I want to give my whole staff a 50% raise. But what can you do? What do you have the empowerment to do to engage your workforce? You can do that through recognition. You can do that through effective communication. And you can do that through understanding needs, right? And HealthStream has told us if we leverage these 3 questions, when we take this survey again, we're going to see our score increase. And it's a lot that happens when you increase your score. All right, so let's look at it by the numbers. These were our top 10 performing departments in the hospital on the survey. So is electrocardiology here? 4.0, very nice. In today's business environment, organizational leaders are challenged every day to make crucial business decisions. And essentially, metrics help them to set clear business objectives as they are reaching organizational goals. So in this course, we will learn how to use the right data or metrics, if you will, to help organizational leaders outline their expectations and set those goals. And we will do that by creating what's called a balanced scorecard, a performance dash card, and other assessment tools that help organizations measure performance. It's very important that organizations have metrics to measure performance because it's kind of like if you're in a car and you put on your GPS, right? And you have your destination. And in the GPS, it tells you, okay, make a right turn here, make a right turn there. And your goal is your destination. Well, that's the same thing with organizations. They have to know what they're working for, what they're striving towards, and they need a way to measure that as they go along. Just like when you go through a checkout line and sometimes on the back of your receipt you have a survey that asks you, how was the customer service today? Or how was your cashier? How was your waiter? That helps organizations determine how they're doing in meeting their goals before the end of the year. So an organization might say, hey, I want to make $1 million by next December. Instead of waiting till December to determine if they're reaching that goal or if they're going to make their goal, you're going to measure throughout the course of the year by obtaining data from various resources to see how well you're doing or if you need to change your plan. Students would collect data through various resources. So in the workplace, you might be asked by the company to fill out an employee engagement survey. How well are you doing? How do you like this job? How's your leader doing? Do you feel the organization supports your career goals? You might be asked to fill out a survey in regards to your performance. You might get a performance review. On that performance review, you might have a Likert scale of 1 to 5. Performance reviews collect data, right? So your boss might tell you you're doing a 1 to a 5. 1, not so good, 5, you're doing well. So students will look at different instruments that we use in organizations to collect data. Whether it's an employee engagement survey, a performance review with a Likert scale, whether it's that customer feedback survey, whether it's just pure financial performance based on receipts and sales and profits, we will look at all those different tools and analyze it to determine, is the data valid? Is it reliable? We will look at it statistically to determine that. Just a little bit of statistics, not too much. I don't want to scare anybody. But essentially, we will look at all the different kind of tools that you can utilize to measure performance, and we will understand if it's valid and reliable, and then we'll determine, well, what do we do with that data? What kind of projects and initiatives will we put in place to drive the data in the direction that we need it to go?